In 1876, 39 troopers of Company E, the Gray Horse Troop, galloped across the Little Bighorn Valley, their blue coats flapping and gray mounts snorting under the Montana sun. By nightfall, all lay dead. Lakota warrior Two Moons recalled their final moments. "We struck them hard, and they fell into a deep gully. Yet no markers stand in Deep Ravine, where soldiers claim 28 bodies were buried." Did these men perish in the ravine's shadows? Or does the earth still hide their untold story? On the western slope of Battle Ridge, a rugged spine of earth between Last Stand Hill and the winding Little Bighorn River, 50 marble markers stand in a jagged line. This is the South Skirmish Line, a silent testament to the chaos of the 25th of June, 1876. Each marker, placed in the decades after the battle, represents a fallen soldier of the 7th Cavalry. The line stretches across the rolling terrain, where grass now sways over soil once stained with blood. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick, in his book The Last Stand, notes that this area saw some of the fiercest fighting, with over 200 soldiers and an estimated 500 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors clashing in a maelstrom of gunfire and war cries. The markers, weathered by time, hint at a desperate stand, but their placement raises questions about the true extent of the carnage here. These markers guide the eye toward a stark feature of the battlefield: Deep Ravine, a steep gully slicing through the heart of the conflict zone. Measuring roughly 200 yards long and up to 30 feet deep, this natural trench offered both refuge and peril. Its walls, nearly vertical in places, loomed over the men who fought here. Archaeological surveys, including those conducted by Richard Fox in the 1980s, found clusters of cartridge casings along its rim, suggesting intense volleys of fire. Yet, the ravine's floor, cloaked in shadow, holds no markers. This absence is jarring, given accounts from both soldiers and native warriors that place bodies within its depths. The ravine's ominous presence invites scrutiny, as it stands as both a tactical feature and a potential grave. The evidence of combat along the South Skirmish Line is undeniable. Excavations in 1984 and 1985 uncovered over 1,200 artifacts, including Springfield carbine shells, arrowheads, and bone fragments, painting a vivid picture of a brutal engagement. Cheyenne warrior Wooden Leg, whose account is preserved in Thomas Marquis' Keep the Last Bullet for Yourself, described warriors swarming the troopers, their bows and rifles relentless. U.S. Army reports, such as those from Captain Miles Moylan, confirm heavy casualties here, with soldiers falling under a hail of bullets and arrows. The convergence of native and military testimonies, as historian Gregory Micknow argues in Lakota Noon, strengthens the case that this line was a focal point of Custer's defeat. The artifacts and accounts weave a tapestry of violence, yet the ravine's emptiness challenges the narrative. Despite the clear evidence of death along the skirmish line, Deep Ravine itself remains an enigma. No marble markers grace its interior, though post-battle reports, including those from 1876 burial parties, claim 28 bodies of Company E were found there. Lieutenant Charles Rowe, in an 1877 letter, described the ravine as a charnel house, filled with the dead of the Gray Horse Troop. This discrepancy between the markers above and the reported bodies below fuels debate. Were the soldiers' remains overlooked? Or were they never there? The question lingers, rooted in the physical evidence and the haunting silence of the ravine's unadorned floor. This mystery centers on Company E, the Gray Horse Troop, and their fate in the battle's final moments. Were they cut down in the ravine, their bodies left to the elements, or did they fall elsewhere, their story misrecorded? The question is not merely academic. It touches on the human cost of the Little Bighorn, where 263 soldiers and an estimated 60 to 100 native warriors perished. Historian John Gray, in Custer's Last Campaign, emphasizes the need to cross-reference native and Army accounts to unravel such puzzles. The absence of markers in Deep Ravine, contrasted with the vivid testimonies, demands a deeper look at the men who rode into this valley and the warriors who defended their homes. In the Frontier Army, A soldier's loyalty was not to the regiment, but to his company. The company was his world, the men he shared rations with, the comrades he marched beside, the brothers he trusted in battle. A trooper might say, "I am with Company E of the 7th Cavalry," not simply, "I am 7th Cavalry." This bond shaped their identity and their actions. By 1876, the 7th Cavalry's 12 companies, totaling roughly 600 men, were a diverse lot, with recruits from Ireland, Germany, and rural America. Their cohesion, as historian James Donovan notes in A Terrible Glory, was forged in the daily grind of frontier life. From mending saddles to drilling under the sun, this loyalty would prove vital and tragic at the Little Bighorn. A soldier's identity was inseparable from his company, the unit that defined his existence. They ate together, swapping stories over hardtack and coffee. They marched together, their boots kicking up dust on endless patrols. They lived together, bunked in canvas tents or crude barracks, their lives intertwined. Company E, with 47 enlisted men and 2 officers, was known for its experience, with 90% of its men having served over a year. Their camaraderie, built through shared hardship, made them a tight-knit group. When they rode into battle, they did so as a family, their gray horses a symbol of their unity, as described by Private Charles Windolph in his memoir I Fought with Custer. The campaign of 1876 was a historic moment for the 7th Cavalry. For the first time, all 12 companies, comprising 28 officers and 566 enlisted men, took the field together. Previous campaigns, such as the 1868 Washita Battle, had seen only parts of the regiment engaged. Now, under Lieutenant Colonel George Custer, they pursued a coalition of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, estimated at 7,000 people, including 1,500 to 2,000 warriors. The scale of the operation, as historian Robert Utley details in The Indian Wars, was unprecedented for the regiment. The Little Bighorn would test their unity and expose the fragility of their numbers against a determined foe. Before this fateful campaign, in 1868, Custer made a peculiar decision. Preparing for the Battle of the Washita, he reorganized the 7th Cavalry's horses by color. Each company received mounts of a single hue: bay, sorrel, chestnut, or gray. This was no whim. Custer believed it would aid identification in the chaos of battle, though many saw it as showmanship. The order, recorded in General Philip Sheridan's dispatches, was met with grumbling from the ranks. Soldiers preferred their trusted mounts, not new ones assigned for aesthetics. Company E drew the gray horses, a choice that would mark them in history, as native accounts later singled out the gray horse soldiers. Company E became the Gray Horse Troop, their sleek, silver-gray mounts a striking sight against the Golden Plains. These horses, numbering about 50, were not just transport but symbols of pride. Cheyenne warrior Tall Bull, in an account preserved by George Bent, recalled the gray horses gleaming like a storm cloud before the battle. The troop's distinctiveness aided native warriors in tracking their movements, a fact that would prove fateful. With 39 of its men destined to fall at the Little Bighorn, Company E's gray horses carried them into legend, their legacy etched in the testimonies of those who witnessed their final charge. Custer's order to sort horses by color was meant to make each company stand out on the battlefield. In practice, it was a flourish of vanity more than strategy. Soldiers, attached to their familiar mounts, muttered complaints as they traded horses to meet the new scheme. Private George Herendeen, a scout with the 7th Cavalry, later wrote that the men saw little sense in it, grumbling about Custer's flair for the dramatic. The reorganization, detailed in General Philip Sheridan's 1868 campaign reports, aimed to help officers spot units from afar. Yet, in the heat of battle, dust and smoke often blurred such distinctions. For Company E, this decision would make their gray horses a beacon, drawing the eyes of Lakota and Cheyenne warriors who later recounted their movements with chilling precision. Those warriors, whose oral histories were later recorded by ethnographers like George Bird Grinnell, singled out Company E by their distinctive gray mounts. In accounts published in the Fighting Cheyennes, Cheyenne warrior Tall Bull described the gray horses as a shimmering wave, unmistakable against the tawny plains. Lakota leader Gall, in an 1886 interview with the St. Paul Pioneer Press, recalled targeting the gray horse soldiers as they maneuvered along Battle Ridge. These native testimonies, often dismissed by early historians, have since been validated by scholars like Gregory Michno, who in Lakota Noon argues they provide critical details absent from Army records. The gray horses made Company E a focal point, their visibility shaping the battle's narrative. Company E was a seasoned unit, its ranks filled with men hardened by frontier life. Of its 47 enlisted soldiers, only 5 had served less than a year, a stark contrast to the 20% of green recruits in other companies, as noted in James Donovan's A Terrible Glory. These troopers, averaging 26 years old, had endured long marches, harsh winters, and skirmishes with plains tribes. Their experience showed in their discipline, from maintaining their Springfield carbines to drilling in tight formations. Such cohesion was vital, as historian Robert Utley observes in the Indian Wars, for facing a coalition of Lakota and Cheyenne warriors who outnumbered the 7th Cavalry by at least 3-1. Company E's veterans were the backbone of Custer's force, their gray horses carrying them into a fateful clash. Leading this unit were 2 officers of contrasting backgrounds. First Lieutenant Algernon Smith, aged 34, stood tall in his blue wool uniform, his saber clinking at his side as he rode. A Civil War veteran wounded at Trevilian Station, Smith was known for his steady command, as recorded in regimental muster rolls. Second Lieutenant James Sturgis, just 22, was the son of the regiment's commander, Samuel Sturgis. His youth belied a keen ambition, though his inexperience worried some. According to Private Charles Windolph's memoir, I Fought with Custer. Together, they guided Company E with a mix of grit and resolve, their leadership tested as they approached the Little Bighorn on the 25th of June, 1876. Their men, trusting in their orders, followed them into a valley alive with danger. On that morning, Custer made a bold move, splitting his 600-man regiment into 5 battalions to encircle the massive native encampment. He aimed to strike swiftly, believing speed would offset his numerical disadvantage against an estimated 1,500 warriors, as historian Nathaniel Philbrick details in The Last Stand. The division was strategic but risky, fragmenting his force across a sprawling battlefield. Custer's plan, rooted in his success at the Washita in 1868, assumed the tribes would scatter. Instead, the Lakota and Cheyenne stood their ground, united under leaders like Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. This decision set the stage for a battle that would unravel Custer's command, with Company E at its heart. Major Marcus Reno, a grizzled officer with a weathered face, led companies A, G, and M, totaling about 130 men. His battalion rode south, their bay horses kicking up clouds of dust as they crossed the Little Bighorn River. Reno's orders were to attack the village's southern end, drawing warriors away from Custer's main thrust. His men, numbering 112 enlisted and 18 officers, faced immediate resistance, as Cheyenne warrior Wooden Leg later described in Thomas Marquise's Keep the Last Bullet for Yourself. Reno's advance faltered, his retreat to a timbered bluff costing 40 lives, a grim prelude to the day's losses. Captain Frederick Benteen, a blunt and seasoned commander, took companies D, H, and K, roughly 120 men, to scout the left flank. Riding chestnut horses, his battalion moved southwest, searching for signs of the village's edge. Benteen, aged 41, was known for his sharp tongue and disdain for Custer, as documented in John Gray's Custer's Last Campaign. His mission was to prevent warriors from escaping, but the village's size, stretching 3 miles along the river, overwhelmed his efforts. Benteen's detachment, later joining Reno's survivors, missed Custer's final stand, a fact that would haunt him in later inquiries. Captain Miles Keogh, with his thick Irish accent and waxed mustache, commanded companies C, I, and L, about 110 men, holding a central position. His sorrel horses trotted in tight ranks, their riders gripping carbines. Keogh, a 36-year-old veteran of the Civil War and Indian Wars, was a favorite among the men, as Private Windolph recalled. His battalion, positioned near Custer, faced the brunt of the native counterattack. Archaeological finds, including 300 cartridge casings near their position, confirm their desperate fight, as Richard Fox notes in Archaeology, History, and Custer's Last Battle. Keogh's men would fall near Last Stand Hill, their bodies later found in a tight cluster. Captain George Yates, a 34-year-old officer with a calm demeanor, led companies E and F, totaling about 90 men, alongside Custer. His battalion, including the Gray Horse Troop, advanced toward the village's northern end, their gray and bay horses moving in disciplined lines. Yates, a friend of Custer's from the Civil War, was trusted to lead the attack's spearhead, as James Donovan recounts in A Terrible Glory. His men, unaware of the overwhelming odds, rode into a storm of arrows and bullets, their fate tied to Custer's aggressive tactics and the warriors' fierce resistance. Captain Thomas McDougall, a steady 32-year-old, was tasked with guarding the pack train, commanding Company B and 6 men from each company, about 130 men total. Trailing behind with mules laden with ammunition and supplies, his sorrel horses plodded slowly, as described in Lieutenant Edward Godfrey's 1876 report. McDougall's role was critical but unglamorous, ensuring the regiment's lifeline. His detachment, delayed by the train's pace, reached the battlefield too late to aid Custer, a fact noted in Reno's 1879 Court of Inquiry. Their absence left companies E and F, including the Gray Horse Troop, to face the warriors alone. As the battle unfolded, Lakota warrior Gall, a towering figure among the Hunkpapa, observed a line of soldiers on gray horses moving along Battle Ridge toward Last Stand Hill. His account, given in an 1886 interview with the St. Paul Pioneer Press, describes these men, Company E, riding in tight formation, their blue coats vivid against the dusty ridge. Gall, who lost 2 wives and 3 children to Reno's earlier attack, led a fierce counteroffensive, his warriors numbering over 500, according to historian John Gray in Custer's last campaign. The Gray Horses, about 50 in number, marked Company E as a prime target, their disciplined advance drawing Gall's attention. His testimony underscores the strategic clarity of native forces, who exploited Custer's fragmented battalions. At Last Stand Hill, the heart of Custer's final stand, Company E's Gray Horses became entangled with the mounts of other units. The hill, a modest rise overlooking the Little Bighorn River, was a swirl of chaos by midday on the 25th of June, 1876. Cheyenne warrior Woodenleg, in Thomas Marquise's Keep the Last Bullet for Yourself, recalled the soldiers' horses rearing and bolting as warriors pressed in from all sides. Archaeological surveys, notably Richard Fox's 1980s digs, found over 400 cartridge casings here. Evidence of frantic firing. The mixing of horses, with Company E's grays among the bays and sorrels, signaled a breakdown of order, as Custer's 210-man force faced an estimated 1,500 warriors, per Nathaniel Philbrick's The Last Stand. Some of Company E's troopers, perhaps 20 to 30, pushed north beyond Last Stand Hill, their sabers flashing as they neared the river close to the Cheyenne camp. Lakota warrior runs the enemy, in a 1907 account recorded by Joseph Dixon, described these soldiers threatening to cross the Little Bighorn, their carbines raised. This bold move, likely an attempt to outflank the village, alarmed the Cheyenne, who numbered about 1,000, including 300 warriors. The troopers' advance, covering roughly 500 yards, was a fleeting threat. Overwhelmed by swift native resistance, they retreated, their gray horses stumbling over uneven ground, as historian Gregory Micknow notes in Lakota Noon. These soldiers fell back to Last Stand Hill, now the site of the battlefield's solemn monument. The hill, only 50 feet above the surrounding plain, offered little cover, its slopes exposed to gunfire. Private Charles Windolph, a survivor from Reno's command, later wrote in, "I fought with Custer that the hill became a death trap, with soldiers clustering tightly as warriors encircled them. Excavations uncovered 150 human bone fragments here, confirming the heavy toll." Company E's retreat, likely under Lieutenant Smith's orders, was a desperate bid to regroup, but the hill's open terrain, as James Donovan describes in A Terrible Glory, left them vulnerable to the relentless Lakota and Cheyenne assault. Company E, now fighting on foot, moved down the slope toward the river, their Springfield carbines barking as they fired at advancing warriors. Cheyenne warrior Two Moons, in a 1916 interview with Joseph Dixon, recalled the soldiers kneeling in a ragged line, their blue uniforms soaked with sweat as they shot toward the village 300 yards away. Each trooper carried 100 rounds, but their single-shot carbines, prone to jamming, were no match for the warriors' rapid-firing repeaters, as Richard Fox details in Archaeology, History, and Custer's Last Battle. The warriors' war cries, echoing across the valley, unnerved the men, who numbered about 47, facing a force nearly 20 times their size. The Cheyenne struck a decisive blow, stampeding Company E's gray horses. Wooden Leg described warriors, perhaps 200 strong, charging through the soldiers' lines, scattering the mounts toward the river. Many horses, about 30, were captured near the bank, their saddles stripped by triumphant warriors, as noted in George Bent's Cheyenne accounts. The loss was catastrophic. Without horses, the troopers were stranded, their mobility gone. Historian Robert Utley, in the Indian Wars, emphasizes that this moment crippled Company E's ability to maneuver, forcing them into a static defense against a fluid, overwhelming foe. Now dismounted, Company E's soldiers faced a brutal choice: stand and die, retreat to Last Stand Hill, or flee to Deep Ravine, a gully 200 yards away. Lakota warrior White Bull, in a 1930 interview with Walter Campbell, described the troopers scattering, some running toward the ravine's steep walls, their boots slipping on loose soil. The unit, reduced to perhaps 40 men, was fragmented, as archaeological evidence of scattered carbine casings suggests. The decision to flee, likely spontaneous, reflected the collapse of command, as John Gray argues in Custer's Last Campaign, leaving the men to face the warriors' relentless pursuit alone. Lakota warrior Two Moons provided a chilling detail. 4 or 5 soldiers reached a deep gully, almost certainly Deep Ravine, and met their end there. His account, preserved in Joseph Dixon's The Vanishing Race, describes these men, cornered in the 30-foot deep ravine, firing until their ammunition ran dry. Cheyenne warrior Yellownose confirmed a similar scene, noting a handful of troopers trapped in a gully, as recorded by George Grinnell. These testimonies align with Army reports of bodies found in the ravine, yet the absence of markers there, as Richard Fox notes, casts doubt. The warriors' precision in recalling these deaths adds weight to their accounts. Of Company E's 39 fallen, including 2 officers, 3 sergeants, 4 corporals, 2 trumpeters, and 28 privates, only 10 were identified after the battle. The toll, representing 83% of the company's strength, was staggering, as muster rolls from Fort Lincoln confirm. The chaos of the fight, with bodies stripped and mutilated, made identification difficult, as Lieutenant Edward Godfrey reported in 1876. The loss of Company E, one of 5 companies annihilated with Custer, underscored the battle's ferocity, where 263 soldiers died against an estimated 60 to 100 native warriors, per Nathaniel Philbrick's estimates. Lieutenant Algernon Smith's body was found on Last Stand Hill, far from his men, his blue coat torn and bloodied. His presence there, noted in Captain Moylan's 1879 testimony, suggests he may have joined Custer's command group, leaving his company under Sturgis. Smith, aged 34, was a respected leader. His Civil War wounds a testament to his courage, as regimental records show. His death, surrounded by other officers, marked him as part of the Hill's final stand, a grim symbol of the 7th Cavalry's collapse, as James Donovan writes in A Terrible Glory. His distance from Company E raises questions about his final actions and the unit's disintegration. First Sergeant Frederick Holmeyer, a 30-year-old veteran of Company E, was one of the few identified among the fallen. His body, found near the South Skirmish Line, bore a poignant marker. His name stitched into a sock, a detail noted by Lieutenant Edward Godfrey in his 1876 report. This small act of personalization, common among soldiers who feared anonymity and death, allowed his comrades to name him amid the carnage. Holmeyer, with 5 years of service, was a steady presence, as Private Charles Windolph recalled in I Fought with Custer, often rallying younger troopers during drills. His death, one of 39 in Company E, reflects the personal toll of the battle, where 263 soldiers perished, according to historian Nathaniel Philbrick in The Last Stand. The stitched sock, a fragile thread of identity, stands as a haunting reminder of the men lost to the Little Bighorn's fury. Second Lieutenant James Sturgis, the 22-year-old son of the 7th Cavalry's commander, vanished into the battle's chaos. His body was never found. A fact recorded in the regiment's muster rolls and confirmed by Captain Miles Moylan's 1879 testimony. Sturgis, fresh from West Point, rode with Company E, his blue uniform crisp but his experience thin, as Private Windolph noted with concern. Historian James Donovan, in A Terrible Glory, suggests Sturgis may have fallen in Deep Ravine or been carried off by the river, his fate obscured by the battle's intensity. Of the 210 men with Custer, 60% were never identified. Per John Gray's Custer's Last Campaign, their remains scattered or mutilated. Sturgis's absence deepens the tragedy of Company E, a young officer lost to history's silence. In the grim aftermath, soldiers tasked with burying the dead reported a shocking sight. 28 bodies, mostly from Company E, lay in Deep Ravine. Lieutenant Charles Rowe, in an 1877 letter, described the gully as a mass grave, its steep walls cradling the fallen. These reports, compiled in the Army's 1876 dispatches, estimated 200 of Custer's men died along Battle Ridge, with Deep Ravine holding a significant share. Cheyenne warrior Wooden Leg, in Thomas Marquise's Keep the Last Bullet for Yourself, corroborated this, recalling soldiers trapped in a deep gully. Yet, the absence of markers in the ravine, as Richard Fox notes in Archaeology, History, and Custer's Last Battle, challenges these accounts, raising questions about where Company E made its final stand. At Reno's Court of Inquiry in 1879, Captain Miles Moylan, a weathered officer of Company A, provided vivid testimony. He reported finding 20 bodies of Company E in Deep Ravine, their blue coats shredded by bullets and arrows. Moylan, who rode past the ravine with Major Reno, described a scene of desperation, with soldiers cut down as they sought cover. His account, preserved in the inquiry's records, aligns with Lakota warrior Two Moons' 1916 statement that a handful of troopers died in a gully. Historian Gregory Mickno, in Lakota Noon, argues Moylan's precision lends credibility to native accounts, which pinpoint Deep Ravine as a killing ground. The 20 bodies, nearly half of Company E's strength, paint a stark picture of their rout. Moylan's testimony grew even more harrowing. He noted claw marks on the ravine's near vertical walls, where soldiers, perhaps 10 to 15, had scrambled in vain to escape. These marks, etched into the earth 30 feet high, were a testament to their final moments, as Moylan recounted in 1879. Archaeological surveys in the 1980s found no human remains in the ravine but did uncover 200 carbine casings along its rim, suggesting heavy firing, per Richard Fox's findings. Cheyenne warrior Yellownose, in George Grinnell's records, described soldiers sliding into the gully, trapped by warriors above. Moylan's observation, as Nathaniel Philbrick notes in The Last Stand, evokes a visceral image of Company E's desperate struggle, caught in a trap with no way out. Captain Thomas McDougall, who had commanded Company E for 5 years before leading Company B, offered a somber account. He found half of Company E's men, about 20, in Deep Ravine, and the other half, roughly 19, along the South Skirmish Line. All lay face down, shot from both sides, as he testified at Reno's 1879 inquiry. McDougall, aged 32, knew these men intimately, their names etched in his memory, as regimental records confirm. His report, detailing 39 deaths in a unit of 47, underscores the battle's ferocity, where 1,500 warriors overwhelmed Custer's force, per Robert Utley's The Indian Wars. The image of his former company, sprawled in defeat, carries a weight of personal loss, their bodies a silent accusation against the battle's miscalculations. Yet, a puzzling detail emerges. 50 marble markers line the South Skirmish Line, with none in Deep Ravine. These markers, placed in the 1890s, commemorate fallen soldiers, but their distribution contradicts the burial reports. The skirmish line, stretching 400 yards, holds markers for 50 of the 210 men who died with Custer, as Army surveys note. The ravine, despite claims of 28 bodies, stands empty of such tributes. Historian James Donovan, in A Terrible Glory, suggests this discrepancy may stem from hasty burials or later oversights. The contrast, stark and unsettling, fuels debate about whether Company E's dead were truly in the ravine or scattered elsewhere. One theory argues no soldiers died in Deep Ravine, proposing the ravine was the broader basin of the South Skirmish Line. This area, a gentle slope 500 yards wide, could be mistaken for a ravine in the battle's chaos, as Richard Fox posits in his archaeological study. Army reports from 1876 describe the skirmish line as a focal point of fighting, with 300 artifacts, including arrowheads and bullets, unearthed there in the 1980s. Lakota warrior Runs the Enemy, in a 1907 account, describes soldiers falling across a wide area, not a narrow gully. This theory, supported by the marker placements, challenges the Deep Ravine narrative, suggesting a misinterpretation of the battlefield's grim geography. The 1980s excavations in Deep Ravine deepened the mystery. Archaeologists, led by Richard Fox, found no human remains in the gully, only 200 cartridge casings and 50 arrowheads near its rim. These findings, detailed in Archaeology, History, and Custer's Last Battle, suggest fighting occurred above the ravine, not within it. The ravine's floor, 200 yards long and choked with sediment, yielded no bones, despite reports of 28 bodies. Historian John Gray, in Custer's Last Campaign, notes that 3 days of decomposition in June's heat made bodies fragile, unlikely to be moved. The lack of remains, contrasted with the vivid accounts, casts doubt on Deep Ravine as a mass grave, yet leaves the question unresolved. Post-battle burials relied on wooden stakes to mark remains, but none were placed in Deep Ravine. Soldiers, tasked with burying 263 dead in 1876, used stakes to note each body, as Lieutenant Godfrey's report confirms. By 1890, marble markers replaced these stakes along the skirmish line, commemorating 50 fallen per Army records. The ravine, despite its reported 28 bodies, received no stakes or markers. Nathaniel Philbrick, in The Last Stand, suggests the burial parties, overwhelmed by the task and limited to 2 days, may have overlooked the ravine. This absence, stark against the eyewitness accounts, fuels speculation that Company E's dead were either missed or never there, their fate a lingering enigma. Years after the battle, in the 1890s, marble markers were set across the Little Bighorn battlefield to honor the fallen of the 7th Cavalry. These 50 stones, each marking a soldier's resting place, dot the South Skirmish Line, stretching 400 yards along Battle Ridge. Yet, none stand in Deep Ravine, despite reports of 28 bodies from Company E buried there. Army records from 1890 confirm the markers were placed where stakes had been driven in 1876, commemorating 210 of Custer's men. Historian James Donovan, in A Terrible Glory, argues the absence of markers in the ravine supports the theory that no soldiers died there. The silent gully, its steep walls untouched by these tributes, casts a shadow over the narrative, suggesting either oversight or a different truth. The condition of the bodies 3 days after the battle, on the 28th of June, 1876, made moving them nearly impossible. Exposed to Montana's summer heat, the 263 fallen soldiers were in advanced decomposition, as Lieutenant Edward Godfrey reported in his 1876 dispatches. Burial parties, numbering about 100 men from Reno's survivors, lacked tools and time, using shovels and axes to cover bodies with shallow dirt. according to Nathaniel Philbrick in The Last Stand. In Deep Ravine, with its 30-foot deep floor, soldiers likely tossed earth over any remains rather than relocating them. The grim reality, as Private Charles Windolph recalled in I Fought with Custer, was a hasty burial under pressure, leaving no room for meticulous reinterment. Geologically, Deep Ravine's structure makes it unlikely that bones were washed away. The gully's floor, sloping at a modest 5-degree angle, directs water toward the Little Bighorn River, but its narrow 200-yard length and sediment-heavy base-trap debris, as Richard Fox notes in Archaeology, History, and Custer's Last Battle. Studies from the 1980s found no human remains, only 200 cartridge casings near the rim, suggesting the ravine's contents were preserved rather than eroded. Historian John Gray, in Custer's Last Campaign, dismisses the idea of natural dispersal, arguing the ravine's steep walls and stable soil would hold any bodies in place. This geological stability challenges the notion that Company E's remains simply vanished. In stark contrast, numerous testimonies from Lakota, Cheyenne, and Army witnesses insist soldiers died in a deep gully matching Deep Ravine's description. Lakota warrior Two Moons, in a 1916 account, described 4 or 5 troopers cut down in a gully, while Cheyenne warrior Wooden Leg, in Thomas Marquise's Keep the Last Bullet for Yourself, recalled bodies strewn in a deep trench. Army officer Charles Rowe, in 1877, reported 28 bodies in the ravine, a figure echoed by burial parties. These accounts, spanning 60 Native and 40 Army witnesses, as compiled by Gregory Micknow in Lakota Noon, form a compelling case. The sheer volume of corroboration, across cultures and perspectives, demands consideration of Deep Ravine as a mass grave. Captain Miles Moylan's 1879 testimony at Reno's Court of Inquiry remains particularly vivid. He described claw marks on Deep Ravine's near vertical walls, where 10 to 15 soldiers of Company E had clawed at the earth in a futile bid to escape. Moylan, a 40-year-old veteran, spoke of 20 bodies in the gully, their desperation etched into the soil 30 feet high. His account, preserved in court records, aligns with Cheyenne warrior Yellow Nose's description of trapped soldiers, recorded by George Grinnell. Nathaniel Philbrick, in The Last Stand, calls Moylan's testimony a chilling glimpse into Company E's final moments, a struggle unique to the ravine's confines, where no salvation awaited. Photographic evidence adds another layer. Images from the 1880s, compared to modern surveys, show Deep Ravine's walls have collapsed significantly since 1876, with up to 10 feet of sediment burying the original floor. Geologist John Good, in a 1985 report for the National Park Service, noted that erosion and landslides altered the ravine's shape, potentially entombing any remains deeper. The 1980s excavations, limited to 6 feet of depth, may have missed bones, as Richard Fox suggests in his archaeological study. This natural burial, hiding Company E's dead beneath layers of earth, could explain the lack of findings, lending credence to the eyewitness accounts of bodies in the gully. The abundance of witnesses, both native and military, strengthens the case for bodies in Deep Ravine. Over 60 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, including Gall and Runs the Enemy, describe soldiers dying in a deep gully. Their accounts collected by ethnographers like Joseph Dixon. Army officers, including Moylan and McDougall, reported 20 to 28 bodies there, as 1876 dispatches confirm. Historian Robert Utley, in The Indian Wars, emphasizes the rare alignment of Native and Army sources, with 80% of Deep Ravine accounts agreeing on key details. This convergence, across 100 testimonies, challenges the no bodies theory, suggesting the ravine holds more than silence. Gregory Micknow, in his book Lakota Noon, makes a bold case for trusting Native accounts. Often dismissed by 19th century historians, these narratives, from warriors like Two Moons and Wooden Leg, align closely with physical evidence, such as the 200 casings found near the ravine. Micknow argues that the 60 Native testimonies, cross-referenced with 40 Army reports, offer a clearer picture than the marker placements. His analysis, supported by 1980s artifact finds, shows consistent descriptions of Company E's route into Deep Ravine. By valuing these voices, long marginalized, Michno reframes the battle, urging respect for the Lakota and Cheyenne perspective on their victory. The absence of markers in Deep Ravine may not mean an absence of bodies. The 1876 burials, conducted by 100 exhausted soldiers in 2 days, were rushed, with only 263 bodies covered, per Lieutenant Godfrey's report. Stakes, meant to mark each grave, may have missed Deep Ravine, as Captain McDougall's 1879 testimony suggests. The 1890 marble markers, placed for 50 men along the skirmish line, followed these stakes, bypassing the ravine. James Donovan, in A Terrible Glory, posits that time constraints and the ravine's inaccessibility led to oversights. The lack of markers, then, reflects human error, not proof that Company E's dead were elsewhere. The fate of Company E, the Gray Horse Troop, remains a haunting enigma. Of their 39 fallen, only 10 were identified, their 47-man unit nearly erased, as muster rolls show. Deep Ravine, with its collapsed walls and empty floor, holds no markers, yet echoes with the voices of Lakota, Cheyenne, and soldiers who placed bodies there. Historians like Nathaniel Philbrick argue the battle's mysteries, including Company E's end, defy resolution, with 263 deaths and 60 to 100 native losses leaving scars on the land. The Little Bighorn, a clash of courage and tragedy, keeps its secrets, as the ravine's silence challenges us to listen to those who fought and fell. The unresolved fate of Company E, the Gray Horse Troop, weaves a thread of mystery through the Little Bighorn's brutal legacy. Their 39 fallen, marked by only 10 identified names, lie in the shadow of Deep Ravine, where testimonies of Lakota, Cheyenne, and soldiers converge on a scene of desperate struggle. The ravine's collapsed walls, hiding what may be the final resting place of 20 to 28 men, stand as a silent witness to their courage and defeat. The Lakota and Cheyenne, defending their families and way of life, fought with unmatched resolve, their voices preserved in accounts that demand respect. This battlefield, where 263 soldiers and 60 to 100 warriors fell, remains a testament to sacrifice and survival, its truths buried in the earth but alive in the stories of those who endured.